Why was she silent when the others were speaking? That question lingered in the briefing room like an uninvited ghost. The projector buzzed, its beam cutting through dust motes that floated lazily in the stale air. Maps of a foreign land glowed against the wall. Coordinates, routes, escape lines, they all meant life or death. Voices overlapped, orders exchanged, pens scratching against paper. Yet she stayed quiet, arms folded, eyes steady, watching. Some thought she was ignoring them. Others assumed she was nervous. But the truth was simpler. She was listening, absorbing, measuring each word as though her life depended on it because it did. Her name wasn't called first. It rarely was. The captain's gaze skimmed past her, resting instead on men who had seen her as nothing more than the last name on the roster. But she didn't flinch. She never did. Still in that silence, memories pressed against her ribs. The scar under her collarbone itched, a line of puckered skin from a wound she never spoke about. To the others, it was an accident, a bullet that had almost taken her out 2 years earlier. To her, it was something else, a reminder that scars weren't endings. They were beginnings written in quiet resolve. The room shifted. A question snapped her back. Recon will need a sniper on Overwatch. Any volunteers? Silence again. A few looked away. One shrugged. The assignment wasn't glamorous. Hours of stillness. No recognition if things went right. Blame if they didn't. She raised her hand. Not high, just enough. The captain hesitated, then nodded. Fine, it's yours. No applause. No approval. Just a line on the plan that now belonged to her. Later, as the team broke into clusters, voices dropped. Conversations turned private. Some laughed about leave dates. Others complained about food rations. She tightened the strap on her bag and checked the scope on her rifle. And still, beneath it all, her thoughts strayed. To her father's voice. To that night long ago before he never came home. He had told her once, scars are just lessons etched into skin. Don't hide them. Don't glorify them. Carry them. She carried his words more heavily than her rifle. The mission began before dawn. Engines rumbled low, blades cut the darkness. Cold air pressed against her face as the helicopter lifted them toward mountains that looked carved by hands older than time. She sat near the door, watching shadows stretch across valleys, her breath fogging against the glass. No one spoke to her directly. They spoke around her, over her. The youngest recruit, Ramirez, glanced once as if wanting to ask something, but his courage stopped halfway. She caught his look, offered a small nod. It was enough. When they landed, the ground was mud mixed with stone. Every step sank slightly, pulling at boots. The smell of diesel clung to the air, mingling with something sharper, fear disguised as determination. They moved in silence, each step rehearsed until they reached the ridge. That's where she split from the group. Alone now, she climbed, fingers scraping rock, rifle slung across her back. The higher she went, the thinner the air, the stronger the wind. Halfway up, she stopped. Not from exhaustion, her body was trained for worse, but because she heard it. The sound of something small, a stone tumbling not from her, from above. She froze, listened, waited. Nothing, only wind. But unease lingered. She pressed onward, every step heavier now with suspicion. By the time she reached her perch, sweat clung beneath her shirt despite the cold. She lay flat, unpacked her rifle, adjusted her scope. From here she could see the valley, the village below, the path her team would take. Every detail mattered, every second mattered. Her radio crackled, the captain's voice. Eyes open, we move on your call. She replied with one word, copy. Then silence. The kind of silence that wasn't empty but full, like the pause before a storm breaks. Through her scope she saw her team inch forward, shapes blending with shadows, perfect discipline, but she also saw something else, a glint, just beyond the bend, too steady to be sunlight, too deliberate to be chance. Her chest tight, she adjusted, zoomed in. A man, rifle raised, waiting. She inhaled slowly, let the breath out. The world shrank to her crosshairs. Her finger hovered. And for a moment doubt clawed at her, not about the shot. She could take it, but about what would follow, because she knew one pull of the trigger and silence would shatter. The village would awaken. Nothing would stay hidden. She closed her eyes, saw her father's face, heard his words. Scars are beginnings. Her finger squeezed. The crack echoed across stone. The figure fell. The glint was gone. Below, her team froze, looked up, then moved faster, slipping past danger that would have cut them down. Her radio buzzed again, a single word, almost reluctant. Good shot. She didn't reply, didn't smile. She only adjusted her scope again, watching, waiting, carrying the weight of the silence that followed. Because deep down she knew this was only the beginning. The hours stretched. Shadows crawled across the valley and the wind cut sharper with each passing moment. She stayed motionless, cheek pressed against cold stone, eyes locked through her scope. Every flicker of movement pulled at her nerves. And yet beneath the discipline, her thoughts slipped inward. The scar beneath her collar burned again. She remembered the day she earned it, an ambush, the smell of burning tires, the scream of metal and glass. She had been younger then, too eager, too ready to prove herself. The bullet had torn into her chest, and for one terrifying second she thought it was the end. But when she woke in the field tent, pain clawing at her ribs, her father's words had returned. Scars are beginnings. That scar was why she was here, why she never raised her voice, why she let others overlook her, because she didn't need their approval. She had already died once in spirit and come back sharper. Through the radio, small voices passed. Ramirez whispering too loudly, the captain barking back, someone cursing at the mud. She smiled faintly. They were soldiers, yes, but they were human first. Hours turned into dusk. The sun bled across the horizon, setting the village in shades of amber and ash. And then movement again. Not one figure this time, 3, then 4, slipping through alleys, weapons tucked beneath robes. Her breath caught, she tracked them. Their path angled straight toward her team's exit. Her hand twitched toward the radio, then stopped. Not yet. Her finger tapped the stone. Once, twice. She needed certainty. One wrong call and civilians would scatter, chaos would explode. She zoomed, focused. The men moved with precision, not villagers, fighters. Their formation gave them away. Her throat went dry. She pressed the radio button. Contact, 4 hostiles, East Alley, moving fast. Her voice was steady, but her chest pounded. Copy, the captain replied. Seconds later she heard it, the muffled clicks of rifles chambering, the crunch of boots speeding up. She steadied her scope again, her finger hovered, her chest tightened. But then another sound, behind her. She whipped around, heart jolting, rifle half lifted. A shadow close, too close. She froze. The figure stood at the ridge's edge watching her, a child no older than 12, barefoot, eyes wide. Her stomach twisted. The boy said nothing, just stared. Her radio crackled again. Do you have visual? Do we take the shot? Her mouth opened, but no words came. She looked from the child to the valley, to the 4 figures closing in on her team. Her trigger finger trembled. The boy blinked, turned, and ran. Her pulse thundered. She spun back to her scope. The fighters were closer now, too close. She inhaled sharply, whispered under her breath, "I'm sorry," and pulled the trigger. The first hostile dropped, the others scattered. Shouts pierced the village air. Her team ducked for cover. The silence was gone, replaced by chaos, boots pounding, dogs barking, metal clashing in alleys. Her scar burned hotter than ever. She chambered another round, and another, each shot a choice, each choice carving something deeper into her. And through it all, one thought clung like smoke in her lungs. Scars are not endings. They are beginnings written in quiet resolve. The night was only starting. Why did her hands keep shaking even after the gunfire stopped? The ridge was quiet again, but not inside her. Her fingers twitched against cold stone, nerves firing long after the last shot. Down below, the team regrouped, their silhouettes darting between shadows like restless ghosts. To them, the skirmish was over. To her, it had only opened another door. The child's face wouldn't leave her, bare feet on jagged rock, wide eyes that said nothing yet accused everything. She forced herself to breathe, slow, steady, like she'd been taught in the endless drills that had turned her body into a weapon. But this wasn't about the body. This was the mind, fraying at the edges, whispering doubts she had no room for. Her radio broke through, Overwatch status. She swallowed hard, reached for the button, still here. That was all she said. No mention of the boy. No mention of the hesitation that nearly cost lives. She kept it buried, sealed behind the calm tone they expected from her. Below, the team moved again. More cautious now, angles tighter, weapons at the ready. The village wasn't silent anymore. Somewhere dogs barked. Windows slammed shut. A low hum of voices rippled, spreading faster than fire in dry grass. She adjusted her scope, tracked every corner, every alley, and yet her focus wavered. Her finger brushed her collarbone, tracing the scar beneath her shirt as if it could anchor her. The memory of her father returned, not the words this time, but his absence. The way his uniform had hung silent in the closet, the folded flag handed to her mother. The scar hadn't come from that day, but it was the reason she'd chosen this path. To be here on this ridge when no one else raised their hand. The captain's voice cut in again. Target house in sight, keep eyes open, call it if you see anything. She zoomed. The structure stood at the village's edge, stone walls, metal door, a single lantern flickering inside, ordinary to anyone else, a fortress to her. Minutes dragged. Her team waited for the signal. She waited for proof. And then movement. A curtain twitched, a shadow flickered, someone inside. She adjusted, every muscle tightening. But then another sound, a low shuffle behind her. Her blood froze. She rolled to the side, rifle clutched tight, eyes scanning the ridge. Nothing, only rock, only wind. But she knew what she'd heard, the child again or something else. Her radio snapped, Overwatch eyes on us, now. She jerked back to the scope. The shadow inside the house had moved again. A man stepped forward, weapon slung, scanning the door like he was waiting for someone. Her throat tightened. This was it, the call she had to make. But her eyes darted once more to the ridge. The nagging feeling wouldn't leave her. Someone or something was still there. She pressed the button. Target confirmed, armed, holding position inside. Copy, came the reply, moving. She should have felt relief. She didn't. The team advanced, each step more dangerous than the last. Through her scope, she tracked every flicker of movement, every crack in the shadows. The man inside leaned closer to the door, waiting, listening. Then it happened, a blast, deafening. Smoke erupted as the front door blew inward. Shouts filled the air. Her heart hammered. She followed the chaos through her lens, shots fired, glass shattering. Figures moved inside the house, some friendly, some not. And then she saw him. Another hostile slipping from the back door, weapon raised, moving fast toward the flank. Back exit, she shouted into the radio. But they didn't hear. Too much noise, too much chaos. Her scope locked, finger tightened. The shot cracked, the hostile fell. The team inside surged forward, clearing rooms. Shouts mixed with silence until, slowly, the noise ebbed. Her radio buzzed again, the captain's voice breathless. House clear, package secured, good eyes up there. But she didn't feel good. Her scope drifted back toward the ridge's edge, toward where the sound had come from. It was empty, silent. But in her chest, doubt burned hotter than the scar. The extraction wasn't far. The team regrouped outside, dragging a bound figure with them. The target. She watched as they shoved him into the dirt, weapons trained on his every move. He spat blood, cursed in a language she only half understood. Her radio clicked. "Overwatch, we're moving to exfil, keep us covered." "Copy." Her voice was steady, her hands were not. As they moved, her gaze lingered on the rooftops, the alleys, every dark space where eyes might be watching. She couldn't shake the feeling of the child or the sound behind her. By the time the team reached the extraction point, night had fully fallen. Shadows swallowed the valley. The helicopter's blades cut the dark, kicking up dust that stung her eyes even from a distance. She stayed at her perch until the last moment. Only when the team was aboard did she pack her rifle and descend. The climb down was worse than the climb up. Her legs ached, hands scraped raw, every step felt heavier, weighed down by things she couldn't name. When she finally reached the chopper, the crew barely noticed her. The others were louder, celebrating, laughing even. The tension had broken for them, not for her. She slid into a seat at the edge, closed her eyes, let the wind from the open door whip against her face. Ramirez sat across from her, his helmet tilted, eyes on her like he wanted to say something again, but he didn't. He just stared, then looked away. The flight back was short, but in her head it stretched into forever. Each second replayed the boy's face. Each gust of wind carried the echo of the sound she'd heard on the ridge. By the time the wheels touched down, she felt no relief, only emptiness. The debrief was quick. The captain spoke for them, painting the mission as success. One hostile down, one target captured, no friendly casualties. Command would be satisfied. When the captain finally dismissed them, she didn't linger. She walked straight out, past the others, past the noise of victory, into the night. The base was quiet this late. Only the hum of generators and the faint bark of dogs broke the stillness. She found herself walking toward the wire fence, where the desert stretched endless and black beneath a sliver of moon. She leaned against the cold steel, closed her eyes. And the memories came. The first scar, the bullet that should have ended her, the endless nights of recovery, the nurses who told her she was lucky to be alive, the way she'd stared at the ceiling, wondering why luck felt like punishment. And then the other scar, the one no one could see, the day her father's body never returned, the folded flag, the silence that swallowed her mother. She opened her eyes again. The desert stretched out, wide and unforgiving. Her hand drifted to her collarbone. She traced the line of puckered skin beneath her shirt. Scars are beginnings. But tonight, it didn't feel like one. A voice broke her thoughts. "You're the quiet one, aren't you?" She turned. Ramirez stood a few feet away, helmet off, hair messy, eyes tired but curious. He shifted awkwardly. "I just wanted to say you saved us back there twice, so thanks." She studied him. His voice trembled slightly, but not from fear, from honesty. She gave a small nod. "Just doing my job." He scratched the back of his neck. "Still, not everyone would have seen it, the guy at the back door. I didn't even know he was there until, well, you know." She looked away, back to the desert. Silence stretched. Then Ramirez spoke again, softer this time. "You ever wonder if it's worth it, all of this?" Her chest tightened. She didn't answer. He gave a faint, sad laugh. "Yeah, me too." He turned, started to walk away. She wanted to call out, to say something, anything, but her throat closed. When he disappeared into the barracks, she stood alone again. The desert wind cut against her skin, carrying the weight of questions she couldn't escape. Her scars ached. The boy's face burned in her mind. The sound behind her echoed louder with each beat of silence. And somewhere deep down, she knew this mission hadn't ended. It had only begun. Because scars never let you forget. The night was a living thing. It breathed in the whisper of the wind over broken stone, in the shuffle of boots over dirt, in the echoes of far-off artillery that rolled across the valley like thunder gods locked in war. Zara moved through it like a ghost, her heartbeat steady, her rifle close, her eyes sharper than the falcon that once circled her father's farm in a time before uniforms, before loss. She had become a creature of both shadow and light. By day she was a soldier, a leader whose presence steadied trembling hands and quelled the fear gnawing at young men's throats. By night she was something else, a reckoner, a blade carried on the wind. Tonight was such a night. The Whispering Hills. The intelligence briefing had been sparse, the way all desperate intelligence is. The enemy had fortified a ridge 2 miles east of her unit's ruined outpost. From there, they rained down fire on the villages below, villages that had no soldiers, only children who played in the dirt and women who carried buckets from wells. The task had fallen to Zara's platoon: silence the ridge, or watch the innocent drown in flames. Her commander, a man twice her age with gray biting into his beard, had placed his hand on her shoulder before dusk. "You know the way better than any of us," he had said softly. "Take the scouts, find us a path, we'll follow." And so she had. Now she crouched low against the slope, breath fogging in the chill night. Behind her, 3 soldiers waited, their rifles muted with cloth, their eyes searching hers for direction. She gave it with a glance, a flick of her hand. Up they went, slow, careful, each step measured against the silence. The ridge loomed above, its outline jagged against the stars. Enemy patrols cut across it like clockwork shadows. A careless noise, a stumble, and they'd all be swallowed by gunfire before dawn had a chance to color the world. Zara's thoughts tightened around the memory of her mother's words. "A steady hand writes destiny in ink that never fades." She steadied herself, every sense tuned to the heartbeat of the night. The breath before fire. Hours bled together as they climbed. Her men trusted her silence, trusted the invisible thread she seemed to follow through terrain that was both trap and salvation. When they reached a narrow ledge just below the enemy's stronghold, one of her scouts, Malik, shifted nervously. "Captain," he whispered, his voice a thread of sound, "too many up there. Even if the platoon joins, it's suicide." Zara did not answer immediately. She let the truth settle between them. He was right. The enemy had fortified the position with machine guns, sandbags, and hidden nests. A frontal assault would be slaughter. She finally turned, her dark eyes locking onto his. "Then we don't give them a front," she murmured. Malik frowned. "You mean?" "Yes," she said. "We go through the belly of the beast, the caves below the ridge. I know them." Her men stared at her as if she had spoken madness, but Zara's voice carried conviction forged in fire. The caves were older than the war, older than borders. Smugglers had used them once, long before her father's time. As a child, she had followed her brothers through them with laughter on her lips. Now she would follow them again, but with steel instead of laughter. Into the cavern's maw. The entrance yawned like the throat of a beast, its darkness swallowing torchlight with ease. Zara led the way, the stale scent of stone and damp earth pressing against her lungs. Every footstep echoed, magnified, threatening to betray them. Yet they moved, guided by her memory of passages once explored in innocence. At one point, the tunnel narrowed so sharply that the soldiers had to crawl on their bellies, rifles dragged behind. Malik cursed under his breath, his words muffled by dust. Zara pressed a finger to her lips, even as sweat carved trails through the dirt on her face. Deeper they went, until the tunnel split into veins like a spider's web. Here, Zara paused, her hand grazing the wall. She remembered the curve, the hollow that led upward. "This way," she breathed, her voice no louder than a prayer. Upward they climbed, the tunnel carrying them like veins toward the heart of the ridge. When they finally emerged into moonlight again, it was not onto open ground, but into the rear of the enemy's encampment. Wolves among sheep. The enemy had grown complacent. They believed their guns and their fortifications made them untouchable. Their backs were turned, their laughter spilling into the night as they played cards around dim lanterns. Zara raised her fist, halting her men. Her eyes scanned every movement, every shadow. She could see it, opportunity shaped like destiny. "We hit them silent," she whispered. "No shots, knives first." Her men swallowed hard, but they nodded. The fear in their eyes did not outweigh the trust they placed in her. Like wolves among sheep, they slipped from shadow to shadow. Zara was the first to strike, her blade whispering across a throat, the soldier crumpling without a sound. Her men followed, each taking down their mark with trembling but determined hands. When it was done, the encampment was quieter than the grave. Only the distant boom of artillery remained, unaware that its guardians had been erased. Zara stood over the fallen, her chest heaving not from exertion, but from the weight of what came next. Fire in the sky. By dawn, the platoon had ascended the ridge, guided by the path Zara carved with blood and silence. They brought with them mortars salvaged from broken supply lines, their shells limited but precious. Zara directed them like a conductor before an orchestra. Positions were chosen, targets marked. The first shell soared into the morning sky with a scream, then fell upon the enemy's artillery nest in a blossom of fire. The ridge shook with chaos. Enemy soldiers scrambled, shouting orders drowned by the thunder of explosions. Zara moved among her own with calm precision, her voice cutting through panic like steel. "Hold your ground, adjust by 3 degrees, fire again." One by one, the enemy's guns fell silent. Where once they had rained destruction on villages, now they crumbled into ruin, smoke curling toward the heavens. Yet Zara knew the ridge was not yet won. The enemy was regrouping, rallying for a counterstrike. She could feel the storm brewing in the vibrations of the ground beneath her boots. The storm breaks. The first wave hit just as the sun tore through the horizon. They came screaming, rifles blazing, grenades arcing through the air. The ridge became a crucible of fire and blood. Zara stood at the front, rifle steady, her voice rising above the din. "Hold the line," she roared, her words carrying the weight of every soul who had trusted her. Bullets cracked the air, tearing stone into dust. Men fell, screaming, but others rose in their place, driven not by orders but by the sight of their captain unyielding in the storm. Malik stumbled at her side, his shoulder torn by shrapnel. "We can't hold, Captain," he gasped. Zara's jaw tightened. She saw the fear, the despair clawing at the edges of her men. If the line broke, the ridge would fall, and with it the villages. So she did the only thing left. She charged. The reckoning. With a cry torn from the marrow of her soul, Zara leapt from cover, her bayonet gleaming in dawn's light. Her men gasped, then followed. Together they surged forward like a tide of fury. The enemy, unprepared for such madness, faltered. Their line wavered, broke, and collapsed under the weight of determination that cared nothing for survival. Zara moved through the chaos like a storm given flesh. Her rifle spoke, her blade answered, her voice rose in commands that kept her men alive even as the world burned around them. By the time the sun climbed fully into the sky, the ridge was theirs. The enemy lay broken, retreating into the valleys beyond. Smoke curled over the battlefield, thick and bitter. Zara stood at the highest point, her uniform torn, her skin streaked with blood and dust. Her chest rose and fell, her hands trembling but her eyes burned with a fire that could not be extinguished. Behind her, her men raised their rifles, shouting her name like a banner unfurled against despair. She had done it. Against the impossible, against the storm, she had carved victory. But as she looked over the valley, watching the smoke rise like a funeral pyre, Zara knew the war had only deepened. This ridge was not the end. It was only the beginning. The ridge was silent now. Silent in the way only places that had drunk too much blood could be. Smoke coiled upward in lazy streams, mingling with the pale light of dawn. The cries of the wounded, enemy and ally alike carved themselves into the morning air. Zara stood among it all, boots planted in scorched soil, her uniform torn and soaked in stains that would never wash away. Her men cheered at first. They shouted her name as if it were a shield, lifted her on their voices as if she had bent fate itself. But when the adrenaline bled away, the silence returned, heavier than before. They looked at the fallen. They looked at the horizon where another enemy force could be gathering even now. Their eyes found hers again, not with cheer but with questions. Zara knew what they asked without words. What now? The aftermath. She walked among the wounded first. Malik lay against a boulder, his shoulder bandaged in strips of cloth torn from another soldier's uniform. He grimaced when he saw her, then tried to sit straighter. "You should be resting," she said softly. He gave her a weak grin. "And let you have all the glory, Captain. Never." Her lips twitched in the shadow of a smile, but her eyes darkened when she looked at his wound. Infection was a more ruthless enemy than bullets. She pressed her canteen into his good hand. "Drink. You'll need your strength." As she moved on, she stopped at every soldier who still breathed. She knelt by them, spoke their names, placed her hand on their shoulders. She gave them something the war had long since stolen: humanity. By the time she returned to the center of the ridge, her men stood straighter, not because their wounds had lessened, but because her presence reminded them they were not forgotten. But even as she gave them hope, Zara felt the weight pressing deeper into her chest. For every man who still breathed, two more lay cold and still. The messenger. By midday, as they buried their fallen beneath cairns of stone, a runner arrived. He was young, barely out of boyhood, his face streaked with dust and fear. He stumbled up the slope, gasping. "Captain Zara, orders from command." She took the folded note with steady fingers, though dread coiled in her gut. Breaking the seal, she read quickly. Her stomach tightened. The words were clear: hold the ridge at all costs. Reinforcements are not coming. Enemy forces regrouping. Expect retaliation within 48 hours. She crushed the note in her fist, closing her eyes for a heartbeat. Then she looked at her men, exhausted, wounded, clinging to this ridge with nothing but grit. 48 hours might as well have been eternity. The weight of command. That evening, Zara gathered her surviving platoon around a fire no larger than a fist. Their faces glowed in the faint light, hollowed by fatigue, sharpened by fear. "The command says we hold," she told them, her voice steady. "That means no retreat. Reinforcements won't come. This ridge is ours to keep or lose." A murmur rippled through them. Some cursed under their breath, others looked to the ground. Malik, pale but listening, raised his voice. "Captain, with respect, we're barely half strength, if they come with numbers." "They will," Zara interrupted, her gaze swept over them. "But so will we. Numbers don't win wars, will does." She let the silence hang for a moment, then continued. "Every shell we fired today saved children in the valley below. Every inch we hold here keeps them breathing. If this ridge falls, they fall with it. I won't let that happen." Her words struck them like steel on flint. Sparks lit in weary eyes, shoulders straightened, some even nodded. They didn't believe in command anymore. They believed in her. Ghosts of memory. That night, Zara walked the ridge alone. The stars stared down coldly, as if they were witnesses unwilling to intervene. She found herself drawn to the cairns of stone, each one marking a soldier whose story ended too soon. She knelt beside the nearest one, her hand brushing the rough surface. Her thoughts drifted to her brother, killed in the early days of the war, his body never recovered. She imagined him lying beneath one of these stones, nameless, forgotten. Her throat tightened. For a moment the mask cracked, and she was not Captain Zara, leader of men, but Zara, daughter of a farmer, sister to the dead. She let the grief come, hot and sharp, then forced it back into the depths of her chest. The living still needed her. Preparing the fortress. By dawn, she was herself again. She turned grief into fuel. Orders rang out across the ridge as she transformed the battlefield into a fortress. Dig deeper trenches, reinforce with stone, salvage every weapon from the fallen, ours and theirs. Nothing goes to waste. She oversaw the placement of snipers in concealed nests. She directed engineers to rig makeshift traps with tripwires and explosives scavenged from unexploded shells. Her men followed without hesitation. Some worked until their hands bled, but they did not complain. Their captain worked beside them, sweat streaking her brow, dirt caking her uniform. She dug, lifted, carried, bled alongside them. She asked nothing she would not do herself. By nightfall, the ridge no longer looked like a graveyard. It looked like a challenge, a statement carved into stone. You will not take this from us. The enemy stirs. Scouts returned with reports. The enemy was massing. Hundreds, perhaps more. Trucks, artillery, waves of infantry. The valley below trembled with their movement. The men listened, their faces grim. Malik swore softly. "It's not a fight, Captain, it's an avalanche." Zara's reply was calm, almost cold. "Then we will be the rock that breaks it." Her words settled into them like iron. Night before the storm. The night before the enemy came, the ridge was quiet. Fires were kept low, whispers softer than the wind. Some soldiers wrote letters by dim light, words they knew might never be delivered. Others cleaned their rifles with hands that shook. Zara sat apart, sharpening her blade with slow, deliberate strokes. Malik limped to her side, sitting heavily on the stone. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." They shared a faint smile. Then Malik grew serious. "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it? All this death, all this." He gestured at the trenches, the graves, the waiting. Zara's eyes stayed on her blade. "I wonder every day, but then I remember the faces of the villagers, the children, the ones who can't fight for themselves, and I know it has to be worth it. Otherwise, what are we fighting for?" Malik was silent for a long time. Finally, he nodded. "Then tomorrow we fight." The first drums of war. At dawn, the enemy came. The horizon darkened with their numbers, a tide of bodies and machines rolling forward. Their war drums pounded, real drums, meant to shatter courage before the first bullet even flew. Zara stood at the front trench, her rifle slung, her blade sheathed, her eyes unflinching. She watched them approach, felt the ground tremble, heard her men's breaths quicken. Then she raised her voice, clear and unshaken. "They think this ridge is just stone. They think we are just flesh. They are wrong. This ridge is our home. This ridge is our oath. And we are not just flesh. We are fire. We are steel. We are unbroken." A roar erupted behind her, raw and defiant. The first shell screamed through the air, and the ridge answered with thunder. The battle for the ridge had begun. The first shell landed short of the ridge, shaking the ground, spraying dirt and shards of rock into the trenches. The second struck closer, a thunderous crack that flung Malik backward with dust coating his face. Soldiers ducked low, clutching their helmets, teeth gritted against the storm. Zara stood tall. The air burned with cordite, the ridge trembling beneath her boots. She lifted her rifle slowly, her breath steady, her heartbeat a drum that matched the chaos. She waited for the enemy to show themselves in the gaps of smoke. And then she saw them. Wave after wave of figures pushing up the valley, their bodies a dark blur against the rising sun. Rifles raised, voices shouting in a language the wind twisted into something harsh and alien. They weren't just soldiers. They were a tide. "Hold," Zara shouted, her voice cutting through the fear. "Wait for them to come closer. Make every shot count." Her men obeyed, knuckles white on triggers, breaths caught in throats. Seconds stretched until they became unbearable. Then Zara's voice split the silence. "Fire." The ridge erupted. The avalanche. Muzzle flashes burst from every trench. The air filled with the whine of bullets, the roar of explosions, the screams of men cut down mid-stride. Dust rose thick, choking, until the valley itself seemed to vanish in a cloud of gunpowder and blood. Zara fired and fired again, each shot measured, deliberate. She picked her targets with precision: officers, machine gunners, anyone who could turn the tide against her. Through the scope, faces blurred into shadows, but the weight of each pull of the trigger pressed deeper into her soul. Still they came, clawing their way uphill, tripping over the fallen, driven by numbers and rage. For every one that fell, two more seemed to rise. Malik shouted orders from the trench, his bandaged arm gripping a rifle like it was part of him. Ramirez, the youngest, screamed curses as he fired wildly, tears streaking the dust on his cheeks. Others fought with silent fury, their mouths set in grim lines as though to speak was to lose the fragile thread of courage holding them together. The ridge shook again as artillery struck the slope, closer this time. The blast deafened Zara for a heartbeat, her ears ringing with a high, piercing whine. She blinked through the haze, saw Malik on the ground again, blood at his temple. Her heart lurched, but his hand moved, weak but alive. She forced herself to look away. There was no time for weakness, not yet. The break in the line. An explosion tore through the left flank. Screams echoed. A section of trench collapsed, swallowing two men in an avalanche of dirt and stone. The enemy surged into the gap, bayonets glinting, shouting in triumph. Zara didn't hesitate. She slung her rifle, drew her blade, and leapt down the slope. The world narrowed to the clash of steel and flesh, the grunts and gasps of close combat. She moved with cold precision, every strike born not of rage but of necessity. A figure lunged at her. She sidestepped, drove her blade upward. Another grabbed her from behind. She twisted, slammed her elbow into his jaw, spun free, and fired point-blank. The recoil jolted through her arm, but she didn't falter. Her men rallied behind her, filling the gap with their bodies, their fury. Together, they drove the enemy back, forcing them down the slope once more. When it was done, Zara stood over the bodies, chest heaving, blade dripping. She looked at her men, bloodied, battered, but alive, and felt the tremor of exhaustion ripple through her limbs. She sheathed her blade. "The ridge holds," she said. Her voice was flat, but her eyes burned. Between waves. The first assault broke against them like water against stone. But water never stopped. It gathered, swelled, returned stronger. As dusk fell, the enemy pulled back. Their dead and dying scattered across the valley like discarded shadows. The ridge groaned beneath its silence. Zara walked the line, checking her soldiers one by one. She bound wounds with trembling hands, whispered words she wasn't sure she believed. She found Ramirez curled in the dirt, rocking slightly, his rifle forgotten. "I can't, Captain," he muttered, his eyes wide and unseeing. "I can't, I shot him, I saw his face, he was my age." Zara knelt beside him, gripping his shoulders. "You can, you must, look at me, Ramirez, do you see my face?" His eyes darted to hers, glassy but focused. "This face is yours to protect, and mine is yours to guide. That boy you shot had someone telling him the same lies. You didn't kill him, Ramirez, the war did. Don't you let it take you, too." Tears spilled down his cheeks, but he nodded. Weakly, hesitantly, but he nodded. Zara squeezed his shoulder once, then stood. Her own throat tightened, but she buried it deep. There was no space for grief here, not yet. The night watch. Night fell heavy and cold. The ridge became a shadow among shadows. Fires were forbidden, any light would betray them. The men shivered in silence, listening to the distant drums of the enemy, the clatter of their preparations. Zara remained awake, packing the lines. Every sound in the darkness clawed at her nerves. Every whisper of wind could have been footsteps. At one point, she stopped and looked down the slope. Torches flickered below, enemy camps, countless in number. She thought of the villagers beyond the valley, sleeping fitfully, unaware of how thin the line between them and slaughter had become. She touched the scar beneath her collarbone, the one that had nearly ended her 2 years ago. Her father's words echoed again, "Scars are beginnings." She whispered into the night, so softly even the wind might not hear. Then let this scar begin something worth the pain. The second storm. It came at dawn again, louder, stronger. Artillery pounded the ridge until the earth itself seemed to scream. Shrapnel tore through the air, shredding flesh and fabric alike. Men clung to the trenches, their knuckles white, their prayers silent. When the barrage ceased, silence fell for a heartbeat. Then the second wave rose, darker, denser, more merciless than the first. Zara lifted her rifle once more, her eyes narrowing, her body heavy with exhaustion but unbroken. She fired until her shoulder burned, until her breath came ragged, until the line blurred between one target and the next. They reached the trenches, hand to hand once more, steel against steel, flesh against flesh. Zara fought like a storm, every motion honed, controlled, but inside the weight grew heavier. She saw faces too young, eyes too human falling beneath her hand. She felt the war sinking deeper into her bones, leaving marks no one else could see. Still she fought, still she stood. And when the wave broke again, when the enemy retreated with their dead littering the slope, Zara did not raise her arms in triumph. She simply leaned against the trench wall, her chest heaving, her hands trembling. Her men looked at her, not as a hero, not as a savior, but as the only reason they still breathed. The cost. By nightfall, the ridge was unrecognizable. Blood turned the dirt to mud, bodies lay where they had fallen, cries of the wounded filled the air. The smell of death clung to everything, suffocating. Malik sat slumped against a stone, his face pale, his eyes sunken. "We can't hold another wave, Captain," he whispered. "Not like this." Zara crouched beside him, her hand firm on his arm. "We will because we must." But inside she knew he was right. The ridge could not take much more. Neither could her men, neither could she. And yet as she looked at them, Ramirez still trembling but alive, Malik broken but unyielding, the others who still stood despite the odds, she felt a flicker of something fragile but unbreakable. Hope. Hope carved not in victory, but in survival. The ridge still stood, but Zara knew the war was not finished with them. The next dawn would bring something worse, something that would test not just their strength but the very marrow of their souls. And when it came, she would face it, not because she wanted to, not because she believed she could win, but because scars were not endings. They were beginnings. The desert night was never quiet. Crickets whined in the dry brush, far-off engines rattled from convoys in motion, and the occasional pop of gunfire reminded everyone that no patch of earth was truly safe. But tonight, the air felt heavier, thick with something unspoken. It was as though the wind carried with it a premonition, whispering warnings into the ears of soldiers who tried, desperately, to ignore them. Ayla sat by the dim glow of a lantern inside the canvas tent she shared with 3 other women. The lantern light flickered against her face, highlighting the exhaustion carved deep into her eyes. The map on the table in front of her was smudged with dust and fingerprints, a web of red lines and notes scribbled hastily during briefings. Her fingers traced the terrain markings like one might caress a scar, knowing each ridge, each valley, was both a trap and a possible salvation. Behind her, Corporal Lena adjusted the sling of her rifle. "You're not sleeping again," she murmured, not accusing, just stating what had become obvious. Ayla didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the red circles that marked enemy strongholds. She remembered the last patrol, 2 men lost, their bodies still unrecovered. The memory stung like salt rubbed into an open wound. "I can't," Ayla finally whispered. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them. The way Rahman fell. The way Khalid tried to drag him out," and her voice cracked, and she pressed her lips shut, forcing the words back down her throat. Silence fell heavy in the tent. The others knew better than to push her. They, too, carried ghosts in their eyes. The midnight briefing. When the call came for the midnight briefing, Ayla was the first out of the tent, boots crunching against sand and stone. The command post glowed faintly under camo nets, radios buzzing with static. Inside, Major Idris stood hunched over the map table. His jaw was locked, eyes shadowed with the weight of too many decisions. "The enemy knows we're weak," he said without preamble. His voice was rough, like gravel dragged across steel. "They've been watching us bleed for weeks, picking us apart, and tonight they'll come." The room shifted. Soldiers leaned in, breath shallow. "They'll hit at dawn, maybe earlier. Intel says they're gathering south of the ridge." Idris slammed his finger on the map. "If we break here, it won't just be our outpost that falls, it'll be the villages behind us, families, children." The weight of his words settled like a stone in every chest. No one needed to be reminded of what would happen if the enemy reached civilians. Ayla's hand tightened on the edge of the table. She spoke before she could stop herself. "Then we hold here, no matter what it takes." Heads turned toward her. A young woman, her uniform stained with dust and her eyes ringed with sleepless nights, daring to speak as if her word carried weight. But Idris studied her in silence, then gave a single, sharp nod. "You're right," he said. "We hold." The watch before dawn. Hours passed like centuries. Ayla found herself atop the watchtower, night vision scope pressed against her eye. The desert stretched endlessly, a black ocean rippling under the faint moonlight. Every shadow seemed to crawl. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching boots. Her heart hammered, not out of fear but anticipation. The kind that sharpened senses, made her hands steady, her breaths measured. Somewhere below, Lena moved among the soldiers, whispering encouragements, adjusting their firing lines. The bond between them was unspoken but iron-strong. Ayla knew Lena would be there when the worst came. A rustle of static in her earpiece. The sentry to the east whispered, "Movement, 10 degrees, multiple heat signatures." Ayla swung her scope. Shapes materialized from the dark, at first vague, then unmistakable. Dozens of them moving like a tide. "They're here," she breathed. The first wave. The attack came like thunder breaking the silence. Mortar shells screamed overhead, exploding in fiery blooms across the outpost. The ground shook. Dust and sand filled the air. Shouts erupted as soldiers scrambled to their positions. "Positions, positions!" Idris's voice roared through the comms. Ayla was already firing, controlled bursts lighting the darkness. Through the chaos, she caught glimpses of enemy fighters sprinting across open ground, their silhouettes sharp against explosions. Lena appeared beside her, rifle braced, her mouth a thin line of fury. "Don't stop!" she shouted over the gunfire. The air became a storm of sound, bullets whizzing past, grenades detonating, men and women crying out. Ayla's shoulder throbbed from the recoil, but she didn't falter. She moved like a machine, reload, fire, duck, rise again. And still they came. Close quarters. By the second hour, the line had nearly buckled. Enemies breached the wire, spilling into the trenches. The fight became hand-to-hand, brutal and desperate. Ayla's knife found flesh more times than she could count. She didn't think, didn't allow herself to feel. Every move was instinct: block, strike, push forward. Blood spattered her uniform, some hers, most not. At one point she found herself back-to-back with Lena, their breaths ragged. "We're not dying here," Lena growled. "No," Ayla rasped, "we're not." They fought like twin storms, covering each other's blind spots, unyielding in the face of chaos. The turning point. As dawn broke, the battlefield was painted in smoke and fire. The enemy had thrown wave after wave, and still the outpost held. But the defenders were bleeding, their numbers dwindling. Ammunition was running low. Major Idris staggered past, blood streaking his forehead. "If they hit us one more time, we won't hold," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Ayla heard him, and something in her snapped. Not fear, not despair, something deeper, a vow. She climbed the tower again, ignoring the sting of shrapnel in her side. She grabbed the radio, her voice cutting through static like a blade. "This is Sergeant Ayla," she shouted. "We are still standing, do you hear me? Still standing. And if they come again, we'll bury them here. Every last one." The soldiers below looked up, hearing her voice carry across the ruins. Exhausted faces hardened, shaking hands steadied, a spark lit in their eyes. For the first time in hours, the defenders roared, not in fear but defiance. The last assault. The enemy charged again, desperate to finish what they started. But the outpost had changed. The defenders fought not like broken soldiers but like warriors who had already made peace with death. Every bullet was a promise, every strike an oath. Ayla felt no fatigue, only fire. Her rifle sang, her knife carved paths, her body moving with the rhythm of something primal. She was no longer just a soldier. She was the embodiment of every unspoken vow, every fallen comrade, every reason to keep fighting. The enemy faltered. They broke against the wall of defiance, against men and women who refused to fall. And when the smoke cleared, the outpost still stood. Aftermath. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of flames and the groans of the wounded. The ground was littered with bodies, friend and foe alike. Ayla stumbled through the wreckage, blood drying on her hands. She dropped to her knees beside Lena, who was bandaging a gash in her arm. They exchanged no words, only a nod. It was enough. Major Idris approached, limping, his uniform torn. His eyes landed on Ayla, and for the first time the hardened commander let the faintest smile flicker. "You kept us alive," he said simply. Ayla shook her head. "We all did." But deep down she knew something had shifted. This night of fire and oaths would never leave them, and neither would the ghosts. The sun rose over the battlefield with a cruel indifference. Golden light stretched across the desert, touching scorched earth, shattered walls, and bodies that would never rise again. The world looked almost beautiful under that first light of dawn, as if it had forgotten the violence that had clawed through the night. But the soldiers remembered. Ayla sat on the steps of the half-crumbled watchtower, her rifle resting across her knees. Her uniform was stiff with dried blood, her hands trembling faintly despite her effort to steady them. Every breath she took carried the metallic taste of smoke. She stared at the horizon where the enemy had vanished hours before, their retreat marked by trails of dust. Around her, the survivors moved like shadows. Some scavenged through the wreckage for ammunition or salvageable weapons. Others carried the wounded toward makeshift aid stations, their boots leaving streaks of red on the sand. And some sat in silence, staring blankly at nothing, their spirits as broken as the walls around them. The air was heavy with the smell of gunpowder, sweat, and blood. Yet beneath it all lay another, softer presence, a silence that seemed to ask the question no one wanted to voice. Was it worth it? The roll call of the fallen. Major Idris called for a roll call. The soldiers gathered in the courtyard, standing in uneven lines amid rubble and smoke. Their faces were pale, some bandaged, others streaked with soot. Idris's voice cracked as he read the names. For each silence that followed a name, the weight grew heavier. Too many silences. When he reached Khalid's name, Ayla's chest clenched. She remembered his laughter around the campfire, his stubborn optimism even in the darkest hours. He had fallen trying to save another. She lowered her head, her jaw tight, refusing to let tears fall where the others could see. When the roll call ended, Idris let the silence linger. His voice, when it finally returned, was hoarse. "They did not die in vain. We held this line. And because of them, because of you, the villages behind us still live." The words were true, but they felt thin against the enormity of loss. Yet soldiers nodded, clung to them like driftwood in a storm. The aftershock of survival. Ayla found herself wandering through the wreckage. Each step brought her past faces she knew, some still breathing, some forever gone. She crouched beside a young private no older than 19, his eyes glazed with shock as a medic wrapped his arm. "You fought well," she whispered to him. He blinked at her as if the words couldn't find a place to land inside him, but his lips twitched, the faintest ghost of a nod. She moved on, stopping to help carry a stretcher, to hand out canteens, to lift rubble searching for trapped comrades. Her body screamed for rest, but rest was a luxury she couldn't allow herself. Not when so many others still needed hands to pull them back from the edge. Yet as the hours passed, exhaustion carved deeper into her bones. She found herself back at the watchtower, collapsing against the sandbags. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since the battle, silence pressed down on her. And then the ghosts came. She saw Ramen falling, Khalid screaming, the faces of the enemy up close as the knife struck. Her chest heaved as she tried to breathe past the images, past the guilt that clawed at her. "Sergeant," a voice broke through. Ayla opened her eyes. Lena knelt beside her, her own face bandaged, her hands steady despite exhaustion. "You need to sleep," Lena said softly. "I can't," Ayla whispered, "if I close my eyes." Lena didn't let her finish. She took Ayla's hand, firm and grounding. "Then don't close them, just sit, breathe, you're not alone." Ayla's throat tightened. For the first time in hours, the trembling in her hands eased. The messenger. By midday, a convoy of armored vehicles appeared on the horizon. Dust plumes rose behind them as they rumbled toward the outpost. The sight sent a ripple through the survivors, relief mixed with unease, reinforcements, or perhaps orders. The lead vehicle stopped, and a tall officer stepped out, his uniform crisp despite the desert. He surveyed the ruins with a practiced detachment before approaching Major Idris. "You held," the officer said, his tone almost surprised. "Command expected," he stopped himself, as if realizing the weight of his words. Idris's eyes hardened. "Command expected us to be wiped out." The officer didn't deny it. He handed over a sealed envelope instead. "New orders. High Command wants a full report, and they want her." He gestured toward Ayla. Ayla stiffened, every eye turning toward her. "Her?" Idris demanded. "She's mentioned in the field transmissions. Her call rallied the outpost. Command wants to hear from her directly." Ayla felt the weight of the words like shackles. She hadn't thought, hadn't planned when she grabbed that radio. She had just spoken, and now those words had traveled farther than she ever intended. The debrief. Hours later, inside the convoy's command tent, Ayla stood before a panel of officers. Their uniforms were clean, their boots polished, their eyes sharp but untouched by dust or blood. "Sergeant Ayla," one of them said, flipping through a folder, "your actions during the night defense have been noted across multiple reports. Morale surged after your broadcast. Soldiers fought harder longer. Do you deny this?" Ayla's throat felt dry. She forced herself to answer. "I don't deny it, but it wasn't just me. Every soldier fought, every soldier." "Of course," the officer cut her off. "But leadership is rare, inspiration rarer still. You've demonstrated both." They exchanged glances, murmured quietly. Then the lead officer leaned forward. "High Command wants you transferred. You'll be moved from this outpost to a larger command structure, effective immediately." The words struck harder than any bullet. "Leave. After everything. After the ones who died here, the ones who still fought beside her." "I won't," she said before she could stop herself. The officers looked at her as if she had grown another head. "Sergeant, this is not a request." "It should be," Ayla snapped. "My place is with them, with the ones who bled and survived this. I won't abandon them." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Finally, the officer's voice hardened. "You'll think on it. Orders are orders, but remember, your war isn't just here. It's bigger than one outpost." The campfire. That night, as the desert cooled under a star-streaked sky, the survivors lit a small campfire among the ruins. It was not for warmth but for memory. They gathered around it in silence, each lost in thoughts of the fallen. Ayla sat with Lena and a few others, the firelight flickering across their tired faces. No one spoke for a long time. Words felt too small. Finally, one soldier raised a tin cup. "For Khalid," he said softly. "For Khalid," they echoed. Another raised theirs. "For Rahman." Voices murmured again. And so it went. One by one, names spoken into the night, carried upward with smoke and sparks. When it was Ayla's turn, she lifted her cup, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "For all of them, and for the ones still breathing." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks skyward. For a moment the faces around the circle seemed lighter, the burden shared. "The oath of the living." Later, as the fire burned low, Lena leaned close to Ayla. "What will you do?" Ayla stared into the flames, their glow reflected in her eyes. "I don't know. If I leave, I betray them. If I stay, I disobey orders. Either way, I carry it." Lena studied her, then said softly, "Whatever you choose, it won't be betrayal. You've already given more than most ever will." Ayla shook her head. "It's not enough. It'll never be enough." Silence stretched between them. Then slowly, Ayla pressed her palm to the ground, to the blood-soaked earth beneath. "I swear," she whispered, her voice more oath than prayer. "I'll carry them with me, every step, every breath. Whether I stay or go, their names will not be forgotten." Others heard her. One by one, soldiers placed their hands on the earth as well, murmuring their own promises. It was not an official order, not a command. It was something deeper, an oath of the living to the dead. And as the desert night wrapped around them, the survivors of the outpost knew they were bound not just by uniform or command, but by something unbreakable. The road ahead. When dawn came again, the outpost still stood, scarred but unyielding. Reinforcements worked to fortify its walls, medics continued tending to the wounded, and messengers prepared to carry reports back to command. Ayla watched from the watchtower, the desert stretching endlessly before her. She did not know what choice she would make when the order came due. But she knew this. Whatever path lay ahead, she would walk it carrying the weight of this night, the faces of the fallen, and the fire of the living. The war was not over, but neither was she. Why does silence feel louder after survival? The desert was calm now. No gunfire, no screams. Only wind brushing against broken walls, carrying the smell of smoke that had seeped too deep to ever fade. Dawn washed the horizon in pale gold, soft light spilling across the battlefield that had once roared with chaos. And in that stillness, Sergeant Ayla stood at the highest point of the ruined watchtower, her rifle slung across her back, her hands braced on the rough stone. She looked out at the land that had cost so much, at the ground stained with the lives of those who had stayed, fought, and fallen. She did not move, she did not speak, she simply carried the weight of orders. Down below, the camp stirred. Reinforcements tightened perimeter defenses, medics worked with dwindling supplies, and engineers surveyed what was left of the walls. The outpost breathed again, but weakly, like a wounded animal unsure if it could rise. Major Idris approached the tower. His limp was heavier now, his body bearing wounds he refused to let slow him. He climbed halfway up before pausing, his voice carrying upward. "They're pressing again for your transfer." Ayla didn't turn. "I know. They'll make it an order soon, and you'll have to decide whether to obey it." She closed her eyes. For hours she had wrestled with it, the voices clashing inside her like blades. Leave and abandon those who had shared the fire with her. Stay and risk being court-martialed. Neither felt right, neither felt wrong. Both felt unbearable. Idris's voice softened. "Whatever choice you make, remember this war is larger than one outpost, larger than all of us. But don't let them strip you of yourself." She finally looked at him. His eyes were tired but steady, and she realized with a jolt that he was speaking not as a commander but as a man who had seen too many soldiers broken by choices they were never meant to bear. "The messenger returns." By noon, the convoy officer returned. His boots crunched on gravel as he handed Idris a folded sheet. Ayla knew before it was spoken what it contained. "Effective immediately," the officer recited. "Sergeant Ayla is reassigned to Command Center Delta. Transport leaves at dusk." The words fell like a hammer. Some soldiers glanced at her, their faces unreadable, fearful she'd go, hopeful she'd stay. Others avoided her eyes entirely, as if they couldn't bear to see the decision etched there. She took the paper, her fingers tightening until it crumpled. She said nothing. The officer's eyes lingered, searching for a reaction. Finding none, he turned and walked back to the convoy. Dusk, the deadline ticked like a drumbeat in her chest. The farewell of the fallen. As shadows lengthened, Ayla walked the perimeter one last time, not to check defenses, not to scout, but to remember. She stopped at the places where blood still marked the earth. Khalid's last stand by the east gate, Rahman's body shielded over the comms unit, the corner where a young private, his name already slipping from memory, had dropped the moment he tried to rise. She knelt each time, her hand brushing the earth, whispering words no one else could hear. Words that were not prayers exactly, but something closer, promises. And as she whispered, others began following her. Lena, a few wounded soldiers who limped beside her, even Idris, slower but steady. They traced her path, repeating their own whispers. By the time they reached the watchtower again, the ritual felt heavier than orders. The choice. The sun dipped low. The convoy engines rumbled, ready to depart. Dust swirled in the fading light. Ayla stood at the edge of the outpost, the crumpled transfer orders in her hand. Every eye seemed to watch her, some silent, some questioning, some afraid of what her choice would mean. She thought of Command's words, "Leadership is rare, inspiration rarer still." She thought of the firelight oaths spoken just nights before, "We carry them with us." And she thought of the scars on her arms, hidden beneath cloth, scars that did not mark her end but her beginning. Her voice when it came was quiet, but it carried. "I'll go." A murmur rippled, relief from some, shock from others. "But," she added, raising the paper high before tearing it down the middle, "I go on my terms. I carry this outpost with me, every voice, every face. If Command thinks I'll become another distant officer, safe behind walls, they don't know me." Her eyes burned as she looked at her comrades. "Scars don't end us. They mark where we begin again. I'll carry you into every room, every order, every fight. Because this isn't just about me. It never was." The torn paper scattered into the wind, and in that silence something shifted. The soldiers straightened. Their eyes hardened, not because she had left them, but because she had promised she never truly would. The road into shadow. Dusk swallowed the desert. Ayla climbed into the convoy, the weight of stairs pressing against her back. Lena's gaze lingered longest. There was pride there, and sadness, and something like understanding. The engines roared to life. The vehicles rolled forward, leaving the outpost shrinking behind her. Each rumble of the wheels felt like a heartbeat pulling her farther from the ground she had bled into. But as she looked back, she didn't see ruins. She saw firelight, names whispered into smoke, hands pressed to the earth in silent oath, and she carried them. She pressed a hand over her chest, feeling the scars beneath her shirt. Not the wounds themselves, but the stories they carried. Stories no officer, no command, no war could strip from her. The quiet resolve. Night cloaked the desert. Stars glittered coldly above, indifferent to the lives beneath them. Ayla leaned back against the rattling wall of the vehicle, her rifle steady across her knees. Sleep would not come, but she did not need it. She had something else now, something steadier than rest. Resolve. The road ahead would demand more of her. More choices, more sacrifices, maybe even her life. But she was not afraid anymore, because scars were not endings. They were beginnings, written not in weakness but in quiet resolve. And sometimes dignity does not speak. It simply acts. The convoy disappeared into the night, leaving the battlefield behind. And in the silence that followed, the only sound was the whisper of the desert wind carrying forward what no one could ever erase, her promise. Her beginning. The end.